I feel like I need to start this morning with a bit of an apology, not so much for myself, but on behalf of the church. As you may know, the readings from Scripture that we hear each Sunday are determined by what's called the lectionary. I, as a parish priest, don't have the option of just choosing what I want to preach on week to week. And so, while the stores are all decked out for Christmas, and we're all making plans for family gatherings for Thanksgiving and celebrations over the holidays, the church in its wisdom has us reading about the end of the world. Merry Christmas. Jesus and his disciples have been in the temple, and they've been looking around, and really the temple is a magnificent thing. The temple was built high on the hill in the center of Jerusalem. You could see it for miles around the city. It was made of gleaming white stone that shone in the sunlight. Parts of it were covered in gold leaf, which made it almost too bright to look at directly. It had many courtyards and many different rooms, all decorated with fine fabrics and jewels and painting, and just was an architectural marvel of its day. Roman historians who had never seen it write about the temple in Jerusalem. They record what soldiers who came back from Jerusalem to Rome said about it. It was known the world over in its time. In addition, the temple was particularly important for the people of Israel because they believed in the center of the temple, in the Holy of Holies, was where God resided. That was God's home on earth. The temple was the place where the people could have their closest, most intimate interaction with the divine, with God. It was a remarkable place, also just as a center of life in Jerusalem. There would be commerce, there'd be, people would make pilgrimages to the temple at various times during the year, to make offerings, to worship, to visit with one another, to see and be seen. It was really the center of life in ancient Israel. The disciples remark on how beautiful the building is, and Jesus sits them down, and they're all looking at the temple, and he says, "These stones will be torn down. This temple will be destroyed." And the disciples, as usual, don't really know what to make of it, but they've learned not to question Jesus. And Jesus goes on to say that not only will the temple be destroyed, but really everything they know of in their life will come to an end. There will be, before that happens, there'll be wars and famines and earthquakes and all sorts of catastrophes. But they are not to be afraid. This is part of the way God has ordered things, that God will bring everything to an end. The world as they know it will come to an end, and God's kingdom will be established on earth. The disciples don't know what to make of this language, and to be honest with you, I'm really not sure what to make of it either. We have a fascination with ideas about the end of the world. I think about all of the movies and television shows about zombie apocalypses. We think about books and TV shows about what the world will look like, what the world would look like if humans all of a sudden disappeared, how quickly things would break down, how quickly New York City would be underwater, how quickly the Golden Gate Bridge might fall into San Francisco Bay, how quickly all of the things, the structures that we work so hard to build would collapse without us maintaining them. We have and think about how often predictions of the end of the world come up. You remember 1999, the concern about the Y2K bug bringing to an end computing systems as we know it, which didn't really happen. And then, of course, the end of the world was going to happen in 2012, which also didn't happen. Apparently, now the end of the world is coming in 2021, so you can mark your calendars and prepare yourselves. That's your day. I don't really know what to make of these predictions of the end of the world, of these predictions of apocalypse. But our Bible is full of them. Our lesson from Daniel, our Old Testament lesson this morning, Daniel is a book that talks about the end of times. Our Bible is, the last book in our Bible is Revelation, which it has a whole host of scary visions about what the end of the world will look like. After studying our passage this morning and reflecting about the apocalypse this week, I think there is some good news buried in here. And so I will share just kind of three kind of loosely related thoughts about this with you this morning. First of all, I think in what Jesus says to his disciples in Mark's Gospel this morning, and what his entire life and ministry, and most particularly his death and resurrection leads to, is that things that look to us like the end, things that look to us like final things, like just the end of the world as we know it, actually are not. They are opportunities for new life. They are opportunities for rebirth. That is the witness of the resurrection. That things that look like the end are really an opportunity for new beginnings. And we know this ourselves, right? The end of a relationship, the death of a loved one, an unexpected and unwelcome diagnosis, losing a job, other catastrophes that can befall us. Somehow we come through those more like the people that God has created us to be. We come through those experiences stronger. The center holds. God does not abandon us. God walks with us through catastrophes, through hard times, and we come out on the other side to new life. You have found this, I'm sure, in your own lives. I have found it in my life. And I see it in the world around us. The temple that the disciples were looking at was in fact destroyed by the Romans just a few short years after Jesus died. And what could have been the end of the Jewish religion, really the end of Christianity, because at that point Christianity was just a movement within Judaism, was not. Both religions flourished and continued to grow around the world. The end of the temple was not the end of the world that the Israelites were afraid it might be. I've been paying attention to the coverage of the fires in California. I have friends and colleagues in that part of the world, and been struck by the number of stories of people stepping up and doing really unexpected things. Folks who volunteer to help with the recovery efforts. A man in a nearby town who closed up his taco truck and drove about an hour to the Walmart parking lot where folks are camping out, and just made fresh, hot food for people free of charge, so they would have something to eat as they waited to find out the status of their homes. I remember a story I read a couple of years ago about a young girl who was being interviewed by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You know, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which provides wishes for children who are very ill, have a terminal illness. And they asked her what she wanted, and she asked, well, how many people are asking for wishes this year? And they said, well, we have about 150 folks. And she said, well, I know what I want. I want all of those people's wishes to be granted. And in response to that, the committee went out and raised enough money to be able to do just that. Final things that seem like the end of the world as we know it, are not. God walks us through those times. We come out on the other side to new life. Second thing I heard Jesus saying in this morning's lesson is that in the face of fear and uncertainty, be wary of voices who claim to have all the answers. In the face of fear and uncertainty, when we don't know what's going on, when we're frightened, any voice that seems clear, any voice that seems certain, can be a welcome answer. But Jesus says, be wary of those voices. Be wary, Jesus says, of assigning meaning to crises. We want to know why something bad happened to us. And we think about all the bad things we've done. And it's very tempting to think, God is punishing me because of what I've done. We want to know why bad things happen to communities in California, why wildfires attack. And people are quick to pop up with answers to that. Be wary of those who claim to have all the answers. Be wary of those who are ready to assign blame in crises. And don't trust, Jesus says, don't trust people who open up their Bibles and cherry-pick quotes to prove their point. Be wary of people who use the Bible to prop up their own claims. The response to fear and uncertainty, Jesus says, is love, is to live more fully into the people God calls us to be. It is not to listen to someone who claims to have easy answers, someone who cherry-picks their way through the Bible to prove a point, someone who can tell you why it is you're going through the suffering that you're going through. Finally, I think our reading from the letter to the Hebrews has some wisdom for us. The writer says, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful." God's promises hold true in good times and bad. And, the writer says, let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds. The point of us gathering as a church, as faithful people this morning, is not just to be fed by Scripture, to be fed in the Eucharist, to be able to offer our prayers to God. It is for us to gather and to, as the writer puts it, provoke one another to acts of love and good deeds. We are here not only to be built up ourselves, but to do our best to build up others. That is, I think, the good news of these dark lessons this morning, that things that seem like the end are not. That God walks with us through bad times and offers us new life on the other side. That in the face of fear and uncertainty in the world, that we should be wary of folks who claim to have all the answers, who claim to know why things are happening, who are quoting their Bible at us. And we should give thanks for this church, where we can come to be nourished by God, and where we come to provoke one another to acts of love and good deeds. Amen. Amen.